In last week's lesson, we looked at his introduction, the disciples overall, the introduction to kingdom life, and who he calls the setting of that, where they were introduced to this whole notion of kingdom life, kingdom living, and what God expected from the. Who remembers that? But what was the setting? Where and
On a mount?
on a mount, yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Sermon on the Mount,
Yeah,
okay,
right.
right, Mount of Olives. All right, so he took them up there, and as I said, I picture, although he was followed all about with crowds in general, people whom he hadn't really called, they just were kind of following him, curious, interested, in this and that. But I look at this setting as primarily the teaching and the directives given to his apostles, okay, or his disciples. He hadn't necessarily named them yet, I don't think. But his closest circle, okay, he was all about training them. Now, if it spilled over and others, caught, ear of it, fine, because it would be directed to them later, okay. But what did we talk about? Isn't it necessary to take your officers first and get them on board with what your mission is, okay? We see this in businesses all the time. They have, your upper management, middle management, lower management. And then Andrew, you probably have some at work where wannabe management, okay, right, but as a manager, there's management and there's labor, okay, labor and management, and the two will never see eye to eye, right? They just won't, okay? And you guys, you'll learn this when you get into the workforce. You'll never see eye to eye, okay? Labor and management. But it's important that management, at least as an entity in a company, are on board together as they face then the labor crew, the labor force. Okay, you've got to be solid in how you portray your company and your mission statement and all of this. So that's what Jesus did. I believe he took them aside and began to teach them specifically of kingdom life and what was the expectation from him. Okay, and then who remembers why? What did he have in mind? Why was he feeling the need to prepare these disciples for what? Judy, do you remember?
For his departure.
But before his departure, there'll be 3.5 years of on the ground, boots on the ground, teaching.
Yeah.
Okay. So right, he was going to take this out to the masses. Okay, and so he couldn't have this. Happening several times throughout his ministry. What? Well, we didn't sign up for that, So he took them aside and said, this is what you're signing up for. This is what I expect, okay? Not only from you, but from all of Israel. Right. All right, so that was last week under the heading, Roman number 1, the disciples are introduced to kingdom life. And then I have an X here on page 2 at letter E. Is that where your mark is? Rachel's nodding. Yes, that's where my mark is. Okay. All right. So let's just kind of pick up there. Let's just start with letter D and just kind of review this a little bit. So read D, E, and F for us, Vicki, please. And how many do not have? Sorry, I didn't make copies, so you guys don't have, or you borrowed one. Okay, so at least every group has one. Okay. All right.
In that sermon delivered to his ecclesia on the Mount of Olives, Jesus outlined the core principles that he would be teaching to not only them as his disciples, but to his people, Israel as a whole.
Let's just stop right there. This in itself is a principle. Okay? What principle do you see that we can extract from this? Right off the bat. Right off the bat. He delivered the information to the church, to the ecclesia, okay? They were the core principles, but would it just stay with them? Marlene, was it ever meant to just stay with them? No, it wasn't. It was meant to flow through them, wasn't it? Okay? So the first thing we note right away is this teaching on the Mount was not just to sit with them, but was to pass through them. Okay? Receive it, absorb it, let it change you, and then now you are an instrument to go out and do the same. Okay, so that's always the principle here with the Lord's teaching. Never just to soak it up like a sponge and then just sit there. Always to then just let it pass through us, okay? All right.
Jesus was laying down his platform at the beginning of his ministry for a good reason. Keep in mind that there had been, before the coming of Jesus, a number of other Jewish revolutionists hoping to deliver Israel from Gentile dominion. Theirs, however, were methods which fostered hatred and violence. Jesus was informing his followers that his plan for Jewish liberation and the establishment of his kingdom would focus upon their heart rather than hatred, and would depend upon the spirit rather than the sword.
All right, and that's why it was so tough for them to, you know, really grab on to these principles, because it involved the inner person, okay? It involved their will and their pride. And so that's why he was met with such opposition, and especially, who opposed him the most? Noah, do you remember who opposed Jesus the most?
Satan.
Right.
Or himself. No. You're fishing for an answer.
I am fishing for an answer. Okay, what am I looking for? Who opposed him the most? Right, the Pharisees, right, yeah, right, the Pharisees. The leadership. Okay, Sarah, you knew that, right? It was the leadership, okay, that opposed him at every turn. Okay? They couldn't even eat food without going through the ceremonial, ritualistic washing of their hands and arms and all this, without them noticing it and then hitting him on it. Like, what? You know? Meanwhile, then he would come right back at him. He was kind of like a Donald Trump. You know, he'd take the criticism, but he'd come right back, spit it right back at him. Okay? Says, you dishonor your parents. Okay? Yeah, you know, so then he would go into why they were dishonoring their parents. And so, it was just amazing. But anyway, so his thrust was to the inner person, not only the outer person. Okay? All right.
Remember from our first lesson how it was stated that these men had enrolled into the Messianic school of discipleship training. Well, here we have Jesus outlining their course studies. These would be Christ's doctrines that he would teach them, and that they would in turn teach to others as his duly appointed representatives.
All right. And then we went off to a whole kind of a tangent on that, his duly appointed representatives. What did we talk about last week on that? Remember I went to the board? What did we talk about there? All right, I'll give you a clue. Let me look for the word here. Pretty sure I saw the word in here. Let's see. Yes, in letter D, we took off on this word.
Ecclesia.
Ecclesia. Okay? And so what is, and I'm going to ask Sister Marlene, because then she came up to me later and said, you know, I was taught this word ecclesia, or about this word, but I wasn't taught that aspect of it. So lay it on us, Sister.
Ecclesia was a called out assembly, but I was never taught that it was authorized.
Yes. Very important element, okay? And then, whereupon I replied, okay, that the ecclesia, I guess we're going to get into this again today.
She won't be going up to you after.
Yeah. And she's writing her note, never again. All right. All right. So, the word used, ecclesia, was not a word that he just pulled out of thin air. And the apostles are going, well, I've never heard that word before. No, they were all familiar with the term ecclesia. Okay? But he was introducing it in a new context. Right, Julie? A whole new context. Okay? Something that they weren't familiar with. Okay? So he was going to take, and this is the principle of teaching. Okay? A good principle of teaching is, with your audience, you start with what is familiar. They got to hook on something, okay? You got to, when they throw out that, what would you call it, an anchor, or whatever.
The line?
Yeah, a line with that grappling hook, okay? So you throw that out there, it's got to hook on something. Now that it's hooked on something, for whatever reason you threw that out there, okay, before you proceed, whatever was in your thinking, why am I swinging this thing around and throwing it out? Well, it's so that it hooks on something, right? Allie, makes sense? Okay? So now that it's hooked on something, whatever you had in your mind, you feel safe now to proceed, right? Because you're tugging on it, feels like it's got a good, solid connection, okay? Well, that's in any lesson, whether it's secular lesson or spiritual Bible study. You throw that hook out there and let your people grab onto something that they're familiar with, okay? Then you take them to uncharted waters, okay? And so, he started with this word, okay? And Tamara, what's this word again?
She's talking back.
That's cool.
That's just pure and simple cool, okay?
Wow.
Ever see a lot of words with two K's in the middle? Ecclesia. Ecclesia, okay? And then we broke this word down, okay? Ecclesia. Rachel, do you remember this? Okay. Ek is a prefix preposition. Okay, then I picked on Allie, and I said, what's that sign over there on that door?
Oh, yeah, they showed her the door.
Okay, I showed Allie the door. There's the door. Okay. And I said, what's the sign on the door? She said, exit. Okay, E-X, ek. Okay, and what do you do? I asked, then it was Asher or Lydia. I asked, what do you do when you see a sign? I think it was Lydia.
Asher, you asked after and you asked me, and
Oh boy, what
She's
a memory.
She's on it.
Yeah.
Can we trade brains?
Yeah.
You have
That's
a
not
memory.
nice. Don't do that to her.
Oh, yeah, you're right, I wouldn't do
That's
that to
mean.
her. Sorry.
That's child abuse.
Grandchild abuse.
Totally. Okay, so exit means go out, okay? So ek is out, okay? And this comes from the word kaleo, which means to call or to call out. That's the part you were taught, to call out. And that's absolutely right, okay? To call out, okay? The idea was, and the word that Jesus would use and that was familiar to them, ecclesia, the context that they were very familiar with was what we would today call a city council. Okay, people who were especially prepared and authorized to go sit in on a council meeting representing the city, okay, and they're govern it with laws or ordinances, okay, or to pass laws or ordinances for the good of the whole. And so ecclesia was basically a city council, a local city council, okay. So it governed in civil affairs, okay, civil affairs. Jesus said, I'm going to create and build up my own ecclesia. And it wouldn't be government or secular things that they would be involved in. It would be what? Spiritual. Okay? So, but that same idea is that when those people were summoned out from the population to come in, it's time for a meeting, and the choir would go out and summons those who had the authority to meet. Okay? So he went out and called these people out and gathered them together and formulated his own council, his own spiritual city council, as it were. Okay, his own ecclesia. All right, so by his authority, they had authority by his authority, or under his authority. Okay? And so we see this spelled out in the Great Commission. All authority is given unto me. Go you therefore under the umbrella of that authority. Okay, so does that make sense now? Okay, so they met with authority. Okay, so when we come here today, where two or three are gathered under his authority or in his name, okay, the Spirit is present with us. Okay, now not every group who calls themselves a church, or even says, hey, we're an ecclesia, unless they're meeting with authority, they're just meeting. If you have citizens who come over here, well, the city council, the official city council is meeting over there, you got a group of disgruntled citizens who are meeting over here. Do we have two official ecclesias? No, we just have one. So we have a group meeting over here, but not with authority given to them by the government, okay? So we have churches meeting everywhere today, but not all of them are meeting with the authority given to them by Christ, okay? Then from there we went into what? Our church history, okay? And by the way, I don't know if you read your bulletin, but there's a little bit of church history in our bulletin today, taken from Martyr's Mirror, which is an account of the Anabaptists in basically Holland, in that area there, the persecution, okay? They were known as the what? Philip. Now just, reach back into the recesses of your mind. And, okay, what was the main overall name of the group that we come from? Think about it, don't rush. Starts with an A.
The antagonist.
Yes. Well, if you were on the other side, you were the antagonist.
Right. The authoritarians.
Uh-huh.
I'm gonna go Anabaptist final
Oh,
answer.
you are absolutely right. All right, 5 points, 5 points, all right. The Anabaptist, okay, and here again, Sarah, we have a prefix preposition. Noah's saying, when's he gonna get to the lesson? Prefix preposition, okay? Okay, Anna, and that's not a girl's name. Okay, Anna, okay, which means what?
In place of?
In place of, huh, what?
You asked Sarah.
I did? Oh, no, I said Sarah, a prefix preposition, Sarah, but I didn't ask her the
Oh, okay,
definition,
she had the
okay?
answers.
So what did you say?
In place of.
In place of, okay, what do you say? Okay, not anti, Anna, no, what'd you say?
In place of?
Okay, over on top of, okay, right, it trumps. Sorry, that was not a political endorsement, but anyway, on top of, okay, and so you have a baby that was sprinkled, water was poured on it, depending on what group you were with, or sprinkled, and they call that baptism. That baby grows up into an adult and accepts Jesus Christ on its own as his personal Savior, and comes to an Anabaptist congregation and says, you know, I've received Christ as my Savior, now what? They say, well, you need to be baptized. Well, I was already baptized. No, that doesn't count, because in the Bible, the biblical order is faith and then baptism. Did you have faith as an infant? Well, no. Okay, you have faith now? Yes. Now you're ready for baptism. Faith and then baptism, okay? So that first baptism didn't count. So we're going to apply a baptism upon you now. Okay? It's a re-baptism. Okay? It's a baptism to replace the other, or to go over on top of the other. Okay? Because the other one didn't count. Okay? We're just going to wash the other one out. Okay? Yes, pun intended. All right. So the re-baptizers, they were known as the re-baptizers. And the Catholics and the Protestants hated them, because they were saying their baptism wasn't any good. So they were hated. But more than just hated, they were what? They
Persecuted.
were persecuted and killed. Okay, so it wasn't live and let live. You know, you have your opinion, I have mine. That would have been nice, but that wasn't the case. Okay, and so they were hated, they were hounded, they were hunted and harassed. Okay, and then they were tortured and killed. Okay, all right, the Anabaptists. So, this is what Jesus started. The ecclesia gave them the authority, and then he said, look, if they hated me for who I am, the Son of God, having come with authority, and then smacks right in the face of the authority they say they have, the Pharisees, then they're going to hate you too, because you're going to claim the same authority and the same lineage. So they're going to hate you for it too. Okay? All right, so that's who we come from, the Anabaptist. All right? All right, there's a little book called The Trail of Blood that a gentleman wrote years ago, and he dove into the history of these early churches, okay, from the days of Christ, the apostles, and forward, and he was interested in that, okay, so he went and researched it, and he found out that in various regions and areas of Europe and Asia Minor, okay, you know, Turkey area, there were these various groups of people known by different names, and whether named after a geographical area or named after a prominent pastor or leader, as the followers of so-and-so. Then he discovered these names, and then as he traveled through time and got closer to our time, they became collectively known as Anabaptists, because they all held the same practice of rebaptizing the Catholics and the Reformers, okay, or Protestants. Okay. So they collectively were called, it was a derogatory term, the rebaptizers. They were a hated group. Okay? So we come through this line, this lineage. Okay? That's why we don't mingle and mix with those that we feel have not come through this lineage, so that we can keep our identity as pure as possible. Just like the Jewish people, we're supposed to keep their identity intact by not marrying Gentiles, okay? Keep the race pure, okay? Because I have to have an entity or a people in covenant, okay, for me to bring my Messiah through. Okay, well, the northern 10 tribes didn't listen. They washed out, they mixed with the Gentiles, they did exactly 180 opposite what God had told them. But the southern kingdom, Judea, even though they worshipped other gods, God did not divorce them as he had the northern tribes, okay? Because he still wanted them as a people to bring the Christ through. So, this is our heritage, this is our lineage, and this is why we do not fellowship with or participate in the ecumenical movement, where all churches kind of holding hands and shaking hands and getting together, having co-services and things like this. We're trying to be a pure people as our forefathers were, okay? So, all right, any questions on that? Threw the anchor out, hooked it, and now let's go further. Okay, all right. Start with what you know, and move on to what maybe you don't know or not as familiar with. So we've arrived then, Philip, at Roman numeral number 2, in which we will get.
Choosing of the apostles. Sometime after laying out his basic platform, Jesus decided it was time to establish a corps of officers among the company of disciples which followed him. The very first disciple, promoted to officer status, was, you guessed it, our man, Simon Peter. In all, Jesus selected 12 men from the group and called them apostles. Why the number 12, you may ask? It correlates to other previous governing bodies in Israel's history, such as the 12 tribes and the 12 judges who judged Israel for a period of more than 200 years following the death of Joshua. So, in keeping with that tradition, Jesus now has his 12 apostolic officers set in his ecclesia. They must now not only learn to follow as a disciple, but to lead as an apostle.
All right, so they were learners and leaders. Okay, well, they were learners first. He was going to develop them into leaders. Okay, all right, so any good leader will have followed first, right? Any good leader will have learned to follow first. Okay, so that when they lead others, they know they can identify with those that are underneath their leadership. All right, next. Keep
Oh,
going.
me? Okay.
Yeah.
C, period. But what is an apostle versus a disciple? An apostle is a specially appointed disciple to whom is given greater privileges and rank over the others. Any well-run organization must have an established leadership. Jesus' ecclesia was no exception.
Keep in mind, he knew he wouldn't be here continuously, okay, with them in person. So he knew he had a short time to train them while in his absence. Okay. Now the question is, did he, when he left and ascended back to his Father after he was crucified and buried and resurrected, then he ascended back to his Father. Okay. And so they're watching him as he's going up. You know, our leader, the one that our rabbi, the one that taught us for three years. And while they're looking up, trying to figure out what's going on here, 2 angels stood over there and says, "You men of Galilee, why are you gazing up into heaven? This same Jesus who you just watched disappear will come back in the same manner." Okay? Bodily and visibly. Okay? And so, but now what? Their leader's gone. Or is he? What happened to replace him? Share it with the whole group what happened. How was he replaced? How did he replace himself?
With the church.
Hmm?
With the church.
Well, the church was there, okay, their leader is gone. How did he replace himself to continue to govern the church or oversee the church?
With the ecclesia.
Holy Spirit.
The Holy Spirit, the Holy Spirit, yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
I knew you knew it, I'm just trying to draw it out of you, okay.
Thank you.
So, it went from physical presence of the Son of God to the invisible presence of the Holy Spirit of God, okay? And so, And that came on the day of Pentecost. Okay? All right, so there was that exchange in administration, but they didn't have him personally or physically. But they had the power of the Holy Spirit there working in and through them. Now, another layer of that will, of course, be a continuity of previous events in the Old Testament that laid out the pattern. Okay? Now, this will maybe blow your mind for those of you that don't know this. So what does that do with Peter? Well, how would I make that connection? That Peter listened to Jesus, and so many didn't, but he did. Okay? So then, by listening to Jesus, what did he sign up for? What did he just get himself involved in? Okay? So another layer of this story would be the tabernacle. Okay? In the Old Testament, of course, the tabernacle, which was a tent, wasn't it? Okay? But it was a special tent. Asher, have you learned about the tabernacle yet?
Not too much.
You haven't heard too much. Okay, maybe that's a future lesson, maybe even when you get older or whatever. But the tabernacle was a tent. And it was a special tent because, why? Anybody?
That's where God designed it.
Yes, okay. It was designed, or directed by God, designed through Moses, okay, while they're out in the wilderness for 40 years, okay, after leaving Egypt. And so they had to have a representation of their invisible God that was leading them all over the place. Okay? That physical representation was the tabernacle. Okay? It was a tent. And inside that tent there were two compartments. One larger compartment when you entered in, and then once you're in, there was a curtain, you enter in to a larger room, and then another curtain, you're facing another curtain, and then just the smaller back end of that tent. Okay? And who could go in there?
Priests.
Only the high priest, okay? How often? Anytime he wanted to?
Once a year.
Only once a year, okay? So that was very, very special, okay? So there was furnishings that they were told to build and put in this. Then there were some furnishings outside of the tent, okay, that were visible. And then surrounding this whole thing was a fence. And not anyone could just walk in, okay? Only the priest ministered within that fence. Okay, so the whole structure, okay, represented a priestly, a priesthood, okay? And so we find that the materials were gathered and constructed to build this worship center, okay? And then once it was built, then offerings were made, blood was spilled to dedicate it unto Yahweh, Israel's God. And then after the blood was shed to dedicate it unto Yahweh, then he filled the inner portion of this, he filled it with his cloud. The priest couldn't even see, they couldn't minister because imagine this whole room just filled up with smoke. Well, we can kind of imagine that, can't we? You know, breathing smoke for 2 weeks. But imagine it was so thick you couldn't see. Okay? That was God certifying it. It was dedicated. Now he's saying, I'm blessing this, I'm authorizing this as now a legitimate worship center. Okay? You may now proceed. Okay? So that was the tabernacle. Okay? So we had the gathering of the materials, the shedding of blood to dedicate it, and then the cloud to fill it, to authorize it. Okay? Fast forward. This tabernacle, which was set up and broken down as they broke camp, and they would travel, and they would set it up again, and they would break camp, and they would travel. It was a temporary thing. Later on, they made a hard copy, okay, a worship center that would just stay put in one place. Okay, first of all, where was the place? Jerusalem. Okay, where this traveled all over Saudi, well, not Saudi Arabia, well, yeah, in that strip there where just east of the Red Sea, where they landed, and then they began, and they circled that area, northern Saudi Arabia, for 40 years before going into the Holy Land. David came along, David came along, and built the hard copy, the temple. Okay, again, materials for the hard copy, stone and gold and all this, was gathered and assembled into a building. Then after that, the priest slaughtered animals, so blood was shed, same pattern. Then after that, God's Spirit filled that to show He authorized it. Interesting, isn't it? So you've got the tabernacle, and then you've got later on the Jewish temple. This is the same pattern, okay? Jesus comes along and builds a third worship center, as it were, okay, called the church, or the ecclesia. Okay? Has the pattern changed? What was the pattern there? Were the materials prepared by John the Baptist gathered together by Jesus? That's what we're studying. He went around and gathered some of the material that John had baptized. He gathered the boards and the wood and the stones, only they would be living stones. He gathered them together, formed an ecclesia, a worship center. Okay, what about the blood? The next step was the blood. What happened there? Sarah? Jesus himself, okay, not lambs and goats and things like this, but Jesus himself was the blood offering, okay? What about when God filled it with the cloud? What was that? That was the Holy Spirit, and filled the room with God's Spirit, okay? So it's the same pattern. It's the same pattern. Had you heard this before? Had you heard this before, Rachel? Is this new? Okay. Did we start with something you knew? And now we're moving into unknown areas, okay? That's what we're talking about, okay? So we begin with something she knew, a little bit of church history, the word ecclesia. We're taking you to what does that mean to us? Okay, well, it's very important to us. Just as the tabernacle and the temple were important to the Jews, so the church is to us. And just as the tabernacle and the temple were meant for the covenant people, so is the church. Okay? And so that's why when we bring in someone into the membership, they join the covenant community. We're not just trying to get anyone and everyone to join, just willy-nilly. They have to meet prerequisites, okay? Having accepted Christ as their Savior, followed in baptism, and then as a member of the church growing alongside the rest of us. Okay? So this is the pattern that we see. All right. So how did I connect that to the lesson? The Apostle Peter involved himself by listening to Jesus, not right away, but he did the second visit, involving himself in this ecclesia. Okay? He was already associated with the Jewish temple, being Jewish. Now Jesus comes along and says, I'm going to create another worship center that will replace this. Okay? And this is where I will be worshipped. I will demand to be worshipped. Okay? Make sense? All right, let's go. A little bit further.
Yes?
Hmm?
Now imagine if you are Simon Peter at this point in your life. You have just gone from being an ordinary commercial fisherman to a commissioned officer in Messiah's Theological Academy. Life couldn't get much better for Peter, could it? But wait, an officer needs to be tested, doesn't he? Did Peter and the others have what it would take to be Christ's first officers? How would they react under pressure? Would they buckle, or would they remain cool under fire? Peter was about to find out what kind of metal he was made of. After all, this was no game. Jesus knew he only had a short time to whip these boys into men. He knew that if they were to survive in a hostile world of Christ haters, their personal faith had to be tested. They had to go through some rough training in order to make sure they really believed in him. So Peter, front and center boy, it's time to go to work.
Amen.
Gotta go to work.
Gotta go to work. Gotta go to work.
It's
That's
like
right.
this Jill Valley's anchor over there. Or Russ for some.
Yeah. New, tonight at 10.
Yes. Well, I hope I'm following tradition. I believe this is fair, accurate, and to the point. I'm just saying.
Just shout out right there. That's right.
All right. Oh, what's this? I have a second X. So this must be where we actually stop. Hey, that's okay. All right. So, Brian, we're going to give you Roman numeral number 3.
The first of many tests. Jesus had just performed another miracle, defeating 5,000 men plus the number of women and children who were present. So now with that astounding miracle still fresh in their minds, Jesus set out to test their faith in him. I don't know whether Jesus was picking on Peter any more than the rest. It just seemed as though Peter placed himself on the firing line more than others. Isn't that the way it usually is? You get a group of students and a teacher, and most of the students will lay low so as not to be noticed and made an example of by the teacher.
Oh boy, now who would that be in our class? Let me just think,
No.
Who is not known to lay low? Who's not known to, I don't wanna point anybody out, but who's not known to lay low?
I'm gonna go Asher.
Right there.
Are you talking about
Yes,
me?
you.
Oh,
Yes.
whatever.
Who's not known to lay low?
Joke.
No. Alright. Page 3.
You're hiding behind me.
Okay. But then there's always a student who doesn't get it, and usually stands out like a sore thumb and is always used for demonstration purposes. He was the one who always volunteered the answer, and it would usually be the wrong one. And he would end up eating his shoe, if you know what I mean. Well, Simon Peter was that guy. He was a little rough around the edges, and Jesus was there to smooth him out.
Alright. And it wasn't easy for him, you know, there was some pretty rough, well, look at page 1, let's just remind ourselves of that first scripture. This is part of the smoothing out process, okay? But he turned and said unto Peter, Get thee behind me, Satan. Thou art an offense to me. For thou savorest not the things that be of God, but those that be of men. So this is part of the smoothing out process. How would you like that? Those words from Jesus.
And it'd be recorded forever.
Forever, yeah. Fortunately, for Peter, he didn't stay, you know, stuck in that particular mode or image in Jesus' mind of him. Okay? All right, next.
That kind of means that he was really talking to Satan, though, wasn't he? In a way?
Yes, he was, yeah, because of the influence.
Right,
Because
because
of the
Peter was
influence.
letting
Yes,
Satan get
absolutely,
in the way.
Yeah, yeah.
And so he was stating, Satan, get out of the way.
Yeah, absolutely,
And
yes.
Peter, come forward.
Yeah. Peter, you're letting Satan interfere with this plan, okay? You may have good intentions, but you don't understand, you don't savor or understand, or, you know, you're not relishing the whole purpose or the plan, okay?
Right.
You're kind of just looking at one aspect of it, and you know, you're saying, I don't want that to happen. I don't want you to die. I don't want you to be crucified. So, okay, well, I'm glad for that, okay? But you need to drop back and look at the whole purpose for the crucifixion.
Right.
That's what he was saying.
And from early on, Peter was a battleground between Jesus and Satan anyway.
Yes.
Because we see even years later when Paul had to confront Peter, I mean, this is years and years later, when Paul had to confront Peter to his face and all
Yes.
of that.
Yes.
Galatians.
Yes.
To go along with that,
There's always that battleground.
Yeah.
he said that Jesus told him specifically, he says, Satan has asked for you, that he may destroy your life,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah. He put a target on his own back, okay? Now, we're not dissing Peter for that. That's just what happened, okay? Because of his personality, he put a target on his own back. Okay, you don't hear, you know, Thomas, you know, Satan's out to get you. You hardly even hear from Thomas. Okay, other than, you got one, Thomas in the whole movie has basically one frame. Okay, Thomas, you're up, you know, you're cueing Thomas, enter center stage, and what is it? He's doubting Jesus. Well, can I have another, is there another scene that I could have, you know, to kind of clean up my image?
You don't want Judas Iscariot to sing.
Yeah, you don't want this scene either, okay. No. Fortunately, Peter had many scenes, okay, and they would slowly get better.
But with Peter too, you're right, it was not only his personality, but his characteristics and that leadership ability that both sides knew that he had.
Yes.
And so, you know, for Satan, it was let's knock him out so he doesn't lead this new cause and really help promote what Jesus was trying to do.
Yep.
And Jesus said, no, I need you to do that.
Yeah.
And so I need you to be front and center,
Yep.
boy,
Yeah.
and really push this thing forward because I'm leaving.
Yeah,
So Peter was
Yeah.
a battleground, I think, until the day he died.
absolutely. And tradition says that he died by crucifixion. And tradition says that he requested that he be crucified upside down because he felt he wasn't worthy to die in the same manner as his Lord. Now, that's tradition, that's what's been handed down, you know, by oral, you know, traditions and teachings. Okay?
But let's say that's the case, that goes in line with his personality.
Yes.
As someone who finally got it, as we see in First and Second Peter.
Yes, yeah, finally got it, and now, you know, whereas he's at some various points resisting the plan, he has soaked the plan in all the way, every factor. Okay, where do we start?
See? Start again?
Yeah.
Okay. So what did Jesus have in mind? He put his disciples into a boat by themselves while he finished up business with the people he had just fed. Afterward, he departed to the mountain to pray and probably rest a little bit. This he did all evening. Meanwhile, the disciples are out rowing around in the middle of the lake and a big storm is heading their way. Several hours later, the Bible says the fourth watch of the night, which was between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m., Jesus appeared out of the water some distance away from the boat. The sun had not risen yet, so the visibility was poor, coupled with the overcast brought on by the storm. That would explain why they did not recognize him, but thought him to be some sort of a spirit and were greatly afraid. But Jesus cried out to them that it was he, and not to be fearful. So they heard his voice, but still could not see plain enough to know that it was really him. So you know who, the one student who always asks for it, hollers out, "Lord, if it be you, command me to come to you on the water."
And notice, was anyone else saying this?
Right, it was Peter.
It's our favorite student.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So he, again, put a target on his back. Okay, Lord, if it's really you, then bid me, call me to come out to you. Now, what was outside that boat? Water.
Raging water.
Raging water. Okay? And so he's asking to leave the safety of the boat and enter into the treacherous waters. Who would do that?
Peter.
Yeah, and Sister Judy, she would do that.
Peter and Sister Judy would both do that. That's in Matthew 16 as well.
Yes, yes. I'll tell you, Rachel would do that. She loves the water, she loves treacherous water, she loves rafting, white water, she would do it for sure, okay? And that's just a given. All right, so now we got him asking Jesus if he can go out to meet him. Okay, not waiting for Jesus to approach the boat, but asking if he can go out and meet him. Okay, did he forget there was water there? No, I think in the moment, he's elated that the voice was Jesus. Okay, again, this is early on, and they're connecting and training. And again, I have to believe that all these little incidents were there for a reason, because they all have a lesson. And so I don't think it was by accident. So I think that these were recorded because they just jump out at us as life lessons. Okay? All right, so keep reading.
Notice none of the others were eager to climb out of the boat, storm or no storm, but they didn't have
They didn't have to.
Oh, they didn't have to, as long as they had Simon Peter as a student who didn't get it. Well, Peter climbed overboard and lowered himself down over the side of the boat, and his feet hit the water's surface. Only he didn't sink down in the water as he had done 1,000,000 times before as a fisherman. A bit unusual, but he had seen Jesus' miracles before. In fact, as recent as yesterday when he fed the 5,000. So out from the boat he ventured. First a small step, then another, then another. Hey, this is cool. Look, guys, I'm walking on the water. All the while, though, Peter kept his gaze upon the Christ just out several yards in front of him.
Well, you can picture this, can't you? You know, he's walking on the water. We still use this phrase today. Oh, he thinks he walks on water. You know, he's just so cool. Okay. So, but here he was. The boat's over here. There's water in between. Here's Peter, and there's Jesus. And he's looking directly at Jesus, and he's walking on the water. No flippers, you know, no snorkel, just the Apostle Peter. No stranger to the water. He'd been in the water many times, okay? But every time he jumped over his own fishing boat, he always went down in the water. But this time was, of course, different. He is totally focused, and he's in the zone, we call it in sports. He's in the zone, okay? oblivious to the water, obviously, focused on Jesus. Okay, but then what happened? What happened, Ryan? Letter H.
Yeah, I was gonna give you the answer, but.
No, okay.
Yet, as Simon walked out further from the ship, he glanced downward at the boisterous waters beneath his feet. The high rolling waves were now causing him to become stricken with fear. He began to panic and struggle for safety. In doing so, he completely took his eyes off of Jesus, who was now moving in closer, though Peter probably didn't notice. As Peter began to sink lower and lower into the threatening waters, he realized he was about to drown. What was Peter thinking right about now, do you suppose? Do you think he was still rejoicing over his having been promoted to officer status? No. Or do you think he just wanted to get back into the boat? All he could think of was to cry out for help to Jesus, which he did. I can imagine Peter was now firmly fastening his eyes upon Jesus as he cried out to him. Jesus reached out and caught Peter as he was going down, pulling him upward to safety, and brought him back safely into the boat.
And reminds me of a story of another Peter, last name Maney. Rafting trip on the Blackfoot.
Circa 1961.
Boat took a twist, a turn, as you know that it does. And Peter flipped out of the boat. And all I can remember vividly in that scene of my memory was two big round eyes, as big as saucers, staring up, into the raft. Okay, totally focused now.
Yeah, Mom was scared.
Oh,
Peter's eyes.
well,
Oh, okay.
those eyes were the other direction going. So I can imagine that when he began to sink, that his eyes were once again focused totally on Jesus. Okay, by then Jesus had moved in closer, within reach. Okay, because he was going to reach down and pull him up. Okay, so that's what happened, Brother Brian. He began to sink because he took his eyes off of Jesus. Okay, all right, Julie, we're going to give you the last three, then we'll wrap that section up.
The lesson, as we all know, was a lesson of total trust in this man, Jesus. Simon, you watched him feed a host of people with only enough food for a single family, but he can now keep you from drowning. As his officers, they needed to learn complete dependency upon him. They needed to feel his power up close, not just see it acted upon others. They needed to understand that he held their lives in his powerful hand.
All right, now the lesson was as they watched Jesus perform miracles for others. Okay, well that's pretty cool. I'm following this person who's doing miracles for others. Okay? And so his connection to the others. Well, that's great. His care and concern for the others. That's wonderful. Okay, compassionate. Okay. But what about their connection to Jesus? Now this was crucial because the crowd's connection to Jesus as they're eating the food that he just provided for them wouldn't last. Okay. Many in that same crowd, fast forward 3 years, would be crying out, "Crucify him. We know he's not our king." What happened to the free, didn't matter. But the ones that he was counting on to stick with him were his officers, his disciples. Okay, so they needed this connection too, hence this lesson. Okay? So I believe that, can't prove it, but I believe that the Lord inspired Peter to say, "Lord, bid me." I think he just kind of roused his spirit and his eagerness, okay? And then he stepped, because he wanted to show all of the apostles a lesson, that look, I'm for you, not just them, but for you. And I will take care of you, because I'm not going to assign you a big assignment to go make disciples and not take care of you. If the end goal is for you to make other disciples, then I'm going to see to it that you stick around a while. I'll take care of you. Okay? So, but they needed to learn this bit by bit by bit, and this was one of those moments that they needed to take in as a learning situation, okay? All right, let's wrap this up.
Jesus waited to the last possible moment, just when Simon cried out in desperation with no hope of survival, and stretched forth his hand and caught Peter as he was on the way down into the choppy waters. Does Jesus sometimes wait till we're actually on our way down before rescuing us? You bet he does. It has to shake us up enough to make a lasting impression. I can only imagine Peter was shaking and shivering from fear, but nonetheless quite relieved as Jesus accompanied him back to the boat. Peter, you now know the kind of trust it takes to follow me. You will forever remember this night, and you will teach others the meaning of trust after you've learned the lesson from this experience.
Again, don't just take in the experience and just keep it personal. Use it to encourage others. That's the whole idea. Everything must pass through. We're just a conduit. We're just spiritual conduits, okay? It never is supposed to just reside with us permanently, okay? Yes, it is. It's supposed to reside with us permanently. There has to be a seat or a center or a base from which it flows. If it just comes in and flows out and the pool's drained, then we have nothing to give, okay? So it must enter in, pool up, okay, and create a base from which the waters flow out. Okay, so we're not draining ourselves, but we're a container for it, so that way we can continue to reach other people down the road, but not just, but there has to be a flow. It can't be like the Dead Sea, where it just comes in and doesn't go out. Okay, so we have to be like a sea where it comes in, but then there's an exit point. Okay, it must flow out. Yet the sea contains the water and holds the water. Okay, so that's you. The water is the Word of God, and you are to contain it, but then let it flow out through you. Okay? These disciples needed to learn this lesson. And back to Philip's point, in case you're wondering, well, did he ever get it? This student who never got it or didn't get it, did he ever get it? Yes, he did. Okay, and that maybe is a future series of messages repeated on Peter, the converted apostle. Okay? We're looking at his early life and struggles versus how he turned out in the sanded shaped format that Jesus was trying to do. We look at him as a finished product, okay, in his epistles, okay, 1st and 2nd Peter. Okay.
Peter's no different than anyone else who has
No.
chosen this life. He had the same ups and downs that every
Yeah.
other human has had throughout history,
Uh-huh.
from Adam and Eve to current day. Everybody has struggled and has done the roller coaster of their life of service.
Yep.
So Peter's no different. He's just very highlighted because of the era in which he lived and the company that he kept. And
Yeah.
during that time with Jesus, he is forever recorded. Jesus knew that this would be written and recorded as an example for people years later.
Yes.
And so he taught Peter the way he also wanted to residually teach others
Yep.
for thousands of years.
Yep. Yep. So instead of recreating in every generation a brand new Apostle Peter and going out and starting all over again, this would be a reference point to those experiences. Okay, so we all can dip into this and learn from it. Okay, so we don't have to have someone come along and do this all over again. Okay, actually, we are those people that come along and do it all over again. Okay, in a sense. All right. Well, let me put an X right here, another X, so that I'm just keep all these X's. So next week I'll not know which X we left off at. Okay. All right, so Peter asked Jesus for an explanation. All right, that's good. Students asking questions. What's wrong with that? Well, we'll find out. Okay. All right, let's close in prayer. Father in heaven.